Welcome back to Is It Worth It Reviews, guys. Today we are talking about a DAC that became a classic. It's been a talk for years and some people believe you cannot beat this one no matter how much money you throw at the problem. We are talking about RME ADI-2FS, so let's dive in. First thing that I want to tell you is that this RME ADI-2FS is slightly older version with AK chip inside. They stopped using it when AK factory caught fire, so the RME moved to the Sabre one. They look the same, they have same name, they measure the same, and people that heard them both, they say they sound quite similar. But I just wanted to disclose this. I'm reviewing AK version thanks to a kind friend that loaned it to me. And the first thing I wanted to mention is how feature-rich and feature-packed this DAC really is. On the back here we do have 3 digital inputs, meaning USB, optical and coaxial. There is no I2S or AES EBU, because this DAC was introduced a few years ago, when those are not common in this price range. Even now I2S, for example, is not standardized. It's still something that really needs some standardizing. But this is really enough for like vast majority of users, these 3 digital inputs. On the side of the analog outs, we have both RCAs, single-ended, and XLRs, which are balanced outs. And that's it on the back. Also, you can notice that the power supply is DC 9 to 15 volts, meaning that you're going to use a power supply brick that came with this DAC, or you can upgrade to a linear power supply if you wish to do so. But bear in mind that the factory, RME, they claim that the filtering of this DAC is so good that you do not need to upgrade the power supply. And I didn't try to do that because I didn't have a good linear power supply of that voltage. So I've tested it with its own power supply. That's it. Now in the front you can see several knobs and buttons and LCD display, which look better of course when you actually turn the unit on. So let's do that. But you should know that RME is one feature-rich DAC. Among other things, there is a pretty advanced EQ setup process here that you can use. And some other features and functions, I won't go into all of that because it would take like half of the video. And also this is a pretty well covered product and you can just read the features on the manufacturer's website. What I am going to tell you though is that it also has headphone output, dedicated out for in-ear models of higher sensitivity and bigger cans. And it's also not an afterthought, it's a pretty darn good headphone out too. Another feature worth mentioning is that this small unit has variable outputs, meaning that you can use it as a preamp, which I usually don't do with DACs. I do not test them that way because like 99.9% of DACs on the market, they use only digital attenuation, which actually decreases the dynamic range of the signal. So having digital attenuation does not mean that you are having preamp functions. RME here, it kinda does, because it still uses some of the digital attenuation, but it has a pretty smart trick up its sleeves. And it consists of RME using 4 different hardware gains on its analog outputs. So depending on which level of volume you choose, it will switch between these different gains, actually using different hardware setting to output different voltage on its outs. And it uses digital attenuation only in between those states to make volume control much more gradual. Of course, you need that. But I don't want to bother you with technical details. What you need to know that this way, dynamic compression due to the digital attenuation is much lower on RME than it would be on a DAC that uses only one fixed output level and then digitally attenuates it completely. So RME actually does have kinda of a decent preamp, but I'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk about the sound. For now, I only wanted to mention that it also comes with a remote. It is made completely out of plastic, but it is actually solid and good. You can point left and right, and the main unit will still pick up your commands, unlike most of these Chinese remotes that you have to aim directly at the unit. So this is good, and it also increases its value as a small DAC/preamp. But now let's talk sound. I first tested RME ADI2 as a DAC only, using my own dedicated high-quality preamp and setting 0 dB gain on the DAC itself. And it sounds really good. I don't know why, but I expected RME to sound kinda flat and analytical and a little bit sharp, like early Toppings. But I was wrong, guys. I don't know why I thought that, but I was wrong. Because RME here is a highly detailed sounding DAC. It can retrieve plenty of details from a recording. Tone textures and quick tiny transients, especially in the mid-range that sounds really well textured and crunchy. But it does that in a natural way. Tone timbre is good, it's full and rich. Bass line, I think it strikes almost the perfect balance between being weighty and full-bodied, but also nimble and quick when it needs to be, and grippy, detailed. It has plenty of textures, good speed. It's not bloated, it's not overblown or anything like that, but it's definitely not thin and depleted. It's just a healthy bass line, really well balanced. And the mid-range is probably the star of the show here with this DAC, because as I explained just a little bit earlier, it sounds really revealing, and you can hear all of those small crunchy details and transients and everything, but it's not sharp or analytical or thin sounding. If anything, it's once again quite natural sounding mid-range. There's body to it, there's pulpability to vocals, and I was thinking like, wow man, you really had wrong preconceived opinion about RME DACs. And then highs, they're all quite good, again plenty of details. This is not the most extended DAC and the airiest sounding DAC when it comes to highs, but everything that you really need to hear, it's there, it's quick, again it's detailed, never sharp, never too bright. And I like that, because this DAC sounds very nice and cozy to listen to. The only thing that I could complain when it comes to the sound is that the sound stage is not particularly wide or deep or tall. It's just a modest sound stage. And to actually assess all of these qualities, including the sound stage, it's best to do that when you directly compare one product to another. So let's do that. My first comparison was with Topping E70 Velvet, and I think this was a really nice comparison because this is a mid-range topping costing around $500 US. It also uses AK chip, which is actually a flagship AK chip, newer and more expensive than the one used in RME. But if you follow this channel regularly, you should already know that chip does not make a product. There's a lot of engineering going around the chip itself, power supply, output stage, etc, etc. So both are equally natural and neutral sounding and mid-range rich sounding with good tone timbre DACs. But RME definitely sounds more revealing. It just reveals more of everything happening in the recording, without sounding sharper at any moment. It's just the plain good old resolution and detail retrieval. No tricks, no sharpening, no elevating of highs, no thinning out of the bass line so it seems quicker and speedier. It just sounds as a higher tier DAC. E70 Velvet is not a muddy and veiled sounding DAC at all. It's actually one of the best sounding DACs, if not the best, up to $500. But when you compare it directly to RME here, its mid-bass is slightly muddier. Its mid-range is just a bit more veiled and tones melt together more than with RME that outlines edges and details and reveal textures better than this E70 Velvet. And that's basically it. It's more revealing DAC and better controlled in the mid-bass especially, but overall tonality and even sound staging is quite comparable. For E70 Velvet, at its price, that's actually great soundstage, but at the price of RME here, it's not really, because at that price point we have R2Rs like Musician Pegasus, Leder Schumann, several Gustard DACs that have huge sound stages. But at $500, that's actually quite decent sound stage. You almost cannot find any better at that price point. So finally, all said and done, you definitely hear that they share some things, but RME sounds like a higher tier DAC, and E70 Velvet cannot match that. Next, I took my SMSL SU-10, which is more expensive at $900, and it's a really good DAC. I proclaimed it my favorite up to $1,000 DAC. And SU-10 is sounding bigger. It has wider soundstage, deeper, and also slightly taller. Because it has more extreme high frequencies, it also sounds airier. It's like more breezy around the instruments. Also in the bass line, SU-10 is slightly warmer sounding. But the difference is not huge, it's just slightly warmer in the bass line and mid-bass. And the funny thing is that in the mid-range, SU-10 is kinda smoother sounding, but not as precise and as revealing as RME. So RME here draws cleaner edges, crisper edges, and it reveals more of that tone texture, that mid-range tone crunchy kind of feel, without actually being sharper or more analytical sounding. It just does that better, but it sounds more congested than SU-10. And this is, in my opinion, these are two quite comparable DACs. I would put them in the same tier. I would just say that SU-10 is wider, deeper sounding, with more air in your soundstage and more empty space around the instruments, while also being softer with edges and transients, slightly warmer sounding, whereas RME will reveal more of these small, quick details and transients, but it will put everything closer to the center of the soundstage, more congested, not as big and airy as SU-10. Personally, you know that I really love big sound stages, and because that does not come with great compromise with SU-10, it's still highly resolving DAC, I slightly preferred SU-10. But you might disagree with me. We all have different tastes and also different systems. Finally, my last comparison was with Gustard A26, which goes for $1,500, which is $200 or $300 pricier than RME, depending on the market and where you are, but roughly something like that. And I won't comment much on their features because RME has headphone output, it's pretty decent as a preamp, while Gustard has an integrated streamer, actually renderer, so you can connect it directly to the network. But if you just compare them as DACs, A26 is definitely a higher tier DAC. it sounds bigger, wider, deeper, taller. There's more air all around, more space around the instruments, and even more detail retrieval. Bassline is more grippy, but at the same time more authoritative and deeper going, just punchier but tighter with A26 than it is with RME. That would basically be it. It's a bigger, more revealing and more controlled sounding DAC. RME is good, but it cannot compare to A26. Oh yeah, one last bonus comparison. Chord Qutest. I don't know what's the current price of Chord Qutest, but back in the day it was almost twice the price of RME. And Chord Qutest does one thing great. It sounds spacious. And it sounds naturally soft around the edges. And RME is more congested one. But also I think that tone timbre and just inner tone details, tone textures, all of that is slightly richer with RME. I didn't expect that. But Chord Qutest makes more simplistic, more analytical tones than ADI2 here. It just separates them and puts them in bigger space with slightly darker background, and that part that sounds staging sounds more natural to me. But Qutest is also kinda thinner sounding, especially in the bass region, where it's more wiry. RME is slightly fuller, weightier in the bass line, slightly richer in the mid-range, it's just more congested. Even though I really like big sound stages, I'm not sure that I would sacrifice these other things that RME does better in my opinion for that sound stage, especially when I think about the price difference. And I said this at this channel many times, but I simply think that Chord Qutest is overpriced. It's a good product, it really is, but it's simply overpriced. I consider these two DACs to be in the same tier, just having different qualities, but when you consider extra features of RME and the price, I think it's just a landslide win for RME. Now, let's talk about how it serves as a preamp. As I mentioned, I usually don't comment on that part of a DAC because digital attenuation is not a preamp section. I'm sorry, it's my opinion, and if you disagree, write down in the comments. But RME has that smart thing with several different gains. It uses a tiny bit of digital attenuation in between those steps. And I think I can definitely notice the benefits of that. Because when I connected RME directly to my power amp, it kept all of its qualities as a DAC. So I won't mention tonality again or what it does good, what it does bad. It simply sounds good directly to my ICE power amp. And the only thing that I find lacking this way is that soundstage lushness and big spacious tones that my preamp can bring. A friend that loaned me this unit cracked this one really good because he was using RME directly with a tube power amp. So you have highly detailed resolving and tonally correct sound coming from RME, and then tube power amp, where tubes actually add a little bit of that three-dimensionality and space and holographic feeling. And I haven't tried that myself, but I really think that's a great idea. And if you want to make a killer DAC that also serves as a preamp directly to the power amp combo, I think that RME plus tube amp is something worth exploring, especially if that power amp has slightly lower gain, because if you have lower gain on the power amp, you will use more of this hardware gain control in the RME and less of the digital attenuation. making the sound even better. This is not critical, but if you have a choice, I would choose tube power amp with not much of a gain, and I think that would work really nice with this RME as a DAC and preamp both. So really thumbs up for the preamp implementation on this RME. Last thing to mention, headphone output. It's not just an afterthought. It's a really good sounding headphone out. And once again, I will not repeat its sonic character because it's the same as I've explained for a DAC section. And it has really decent amount of power. Whatever I hooked to this device, I did not lack drive or power. And I quickly compared it, for example, to Topping E70 L70 stack. And that stack goes for $700 in total. And guys, these two sounded so close that I swear at some points I couldn't differentiate their sound. And I usually notice any small difference or detail and I latch for that, but I wouldn't do a blind test between Topping E70 L70 stack and RME ADI2 headphone out. It's really similar. And this headphone stack is more affordable at $700. And if you only need a headphone out, it is a better deal than RME. But RME is a better DAC than E70 or E70 Velvet. So if you want to use it mainly as a DAC, but use its headphone out sometimes, this way you get a higher tier DAC and still a really great and powerful headphone amp that can match $700 stack. And that actually leads me to the conclusion. What we have with ADI2 is a multi-purpose, multifunctional, rich with features device that everything it does really good. Now, if you pick one of these capabilities, one of these features, it's not the best in class. If you only need a DAC, fixed level output, there is a better DAC at similar price level, for example Gustard A26, higher tier of a DAC compared to RME. But it does not have headphone output and it's not as good as a preamp in my opinion. Then, let's say that you only need a headphone out. You can get a really good sounding stack at $700 that's equaling this one. Or upgrade to something like Topping A90 discrete headphone amp, which will be better than what you get with RME here. But in that case, the DAC from that stack will not be as good as RME if you ever want to use it in your, let's say, speaker system. None of these, that better DAC, like Gustard, or that better headphone stack, like from Topping for example, none of these will sound really as good as variable outputs of RME when connected directly to the power amp. So what I'm saying here is that RME ADI2 is, when you pick one of its functions, it can be bested for the same amount of money with some product that's just focused on that and that only. But if you look at it as all-in-one bundle, and if you want to try all of its features, it's hard, even now, after a few years after this model was released, it's really difficult to find anything that offers all of these functions and offers them at the equally high level. RME ADI2 is a great all-in-one device that, in my opinion, fully deserves the status it gets. It was released a few years ago when most of these Gustards and SMSLs that I'm comparing it to nowadays were not even on the market. At that time, when I think about products that I've heard and tested personally at that time, RME would wipe the floor with most of them. Even nowadays, several years later, and guys, like 3 to 4 years in DAC years, it's a lot. But nowadays, this is still a very competitive product and still a very valid choice if you want to utilize most of its functionalities. And that would be all for today, guys. Now click that button, comment down below the video, subscribe please if you haven't already, because more subscribers means that I can get more things to review that you maybe want to see reviewed and compared to the ones that I already did. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye.